Gotcha. Sounds cool. Now, I've seen on your website talking about that you have done case studies on business email compromise, also known as BEC and ransomware. And as you know, these are some of the big cyber threats out there. Can you elaborate more about this in your work?
Yeah, you bet. In fact, this is something that we decided to put on the website recently just because of the volume of incidents related to business email compromise lately. So first of all, let me just define what that is. So business email compromise is unauthorized access to data stored within the email system of a business. The most common example of that today is where a business has employees that are logging into a cloud-based email system, so Office 365 or Google G Suite, what have you. There's several out there, but they will be, logging into this, and they don't have multi-factor authentication enabled on their account, which means if they get compromised, for example, via a phishing email that they click on and go to a website and type their credentials into, anybody anywhere in the world can log into their cloud-based email service without having to, provide any validation other than their username and password, which, of course, they just gave up. Now, once they're in there, they got access to their account, all the data that's inside their email inbox and outbox and any other box. But more importantly, for the attackers in some of these complex business email compromise situations, they get to go look at the address list for that organization. They get to look at the address list for anybody that this user that they've compromised has ever sent an email to. So now they have a whole new set of targets. And let me ask you a question. If you got an email from somebody within your organization asking you to do something to help them, do you think you'd be more likely to than if you got an email from somebody outside your organization? Well, the answer is you're going to try to help your coworker do their job. And so what the attackers know this. So what they're going to do is they're going to send certain select people in the organization. By the way, they've already figured out who these people are, what their title is, and what they're responsible for. So they'll send the purchaser an email from a compromised internal account. The purchaser, for example, will get that and say, okay, well, Jill just needs me to help her do her job, or just this so that she can get what she needs done. So I'm going to do that, and they wind up getting their account compromised. Now, once the attackers have gotten to a privileged title position, so for example, the purchaser, what they can do is contact that company's vendors and say, hey, we'd like a refund on this, or maybe they will contact the company's clients if they're working with the accounts payable or the accounts receivable folks in the business. If they're able to compromise the accounts receivable people, and they could say, hey, we're going to send you a new invoice, and we've changed our routing number and our bank account number. So please, from now on, pay us via this bank account and this routing number. We've seen a lot of that happen. And then what happens is, a month later, they're doing an audit and they realize, hey, we missed 30 days worth of accounts receivable. And then slowly they figured out that looks like you sent an email out saying, hey, change this. And then people will go, well, I didn't send that. And that's when they call us because they realize they've been breached. So that's an example of a business email compromise. There's a lot of different kinds of examples of it, but it all sort of revolves around unauthorized access to a compromised user's inbox and email account, and then what attackers can do once they've got access to that.
Okay. Now, can you provide an example of a specific cybersecurity threat that you help the customer mitigate?
Yeah, just give me a second let me think about it. There's several.
I'll take your time.
Yeah. Would you like to talk, are you talking about incident response or maybe just risk management? We've got, I can talk about several different kinds. Consulting, testing, I shared with you with the testing that we were able to identify a critical vulnerability through a penetration test that would basically allow carte blanche access to a trading organization's prevention. So that's one example, but maybe incident response wise, I can tell you that.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So for incident response, let me think. There's quite a few. We've had, for example, we had a client who was an advertiser, online advertiser, and their job was to basically put ads on websites that had signed up to receive some form of payment whenever somebody clicked on an ad that was on this advertiser's web advertising solution. Interestingly enough, there was some political activity around unions up in Wisconsin. This was a few years ago, and the attackers in this case were capitalizing on the fact that people were visiting a website. They broke into this advertiser's syndication capability for ads, injected some Java drive-by download script that basically allowed people to, if they visited the site that this ad was being displayed on, their computer would then go download some malware. And so you can imagine that a national news item would drive a lot of traffic to, for example, in this case, the union webpage up in Wisconsin where there was a political fight going on. There was a lot of traffic on there, and this advertising syndication capability that our client had was compromised, and so everybody that was going to this website was getting their computers compromised by this drive-by download thing. So we were able to go in, first of all, and investigate and understand exactly what was going on, because people were, they had, our client had a lot of different folks, very angry folks, calling them and saying, hey, you guys hacked my computer, you owe us money, you caused malware download, I've got all these problems. Well, we were able to figure out exactly what happened, how it happened, able to put a stop to it, and then make sure that our client was able to address the various claims the right way by giving them the data as to what happened, when it happened. So, for example, some people were just making claims that were spurious, but, if it wasn't within this time frame and if it wasn't as a result of this particular piece of code, then it didn't happen at our client's site. So we were able to get very specific and provide forensically sound evidence to our clients so that they can use that to their advantage whenever they're dealing with the fallout of being breached. I mean, there's a lot of potential risk that gets realized in a breach response. One of those is reputational risk. I mean, we've worked with clients that have taken several black eyes over the kind of breach response or emergency situations that they've had to deal with, where they've been breached. They told everybody, and then they got breached again, and they told everybody, and then they finally called us, and we rolled in and figured out what was the root cause, so that they could then go tell people the whole story. People tend to react better whenever you can explain from a root cause perspective what happened, why it happened, how it got stopped, and why it's not a problem anymore. And we've got several examples where we've done that.
Okay, sounds incredible. Now, let's just shift gears now and talk about the cybersecurity threat landscape in general now. On other points, we keep hearing about Russia in the news all the time, and their potential to meddle again with midterm elections. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, every time I look at the news headlines every morning in cybersecurity, there's something about Russia coming out about some elections or something. I mean, what are your thoughts on that in general?
Yeah, so first of all, we're talking about a different level of geopolitical intrigue, we'll just call it, okay? This is a meta level, this is a very high level attempt by nation states to influence other nation states' populace by manipulating the information that they get, manipulating what they do with that information. And so, for example, you see the kind of headlines where, Russia, for example, tampering with the United States during 2016 elections, and then, of course, the threat and concern about the midterms. I mean, these are things that they didn't just pop up in 2016. They've been going on for a long time, I can tell you from experience, especially over in Europe and Eastern Europe. There's been a lot of that kind of activity. We've been involved in some of that stuff. Bottom line is it's basically psychological operations with a bit of a twist, because you're using highly technical sources and methods to manipulate information for a target audience. And, this stuff isn't new. The mechanism is new. And maybe that's what's got everybody kind of spun up about this. But if you can understand the mechanism, then you can understand how to resolve those kinds of problems. And I think that that's happening right now. I mean, if you look at where, for example, Facebook, some of the things that they've said about what they're trying to do to identify this kind of activity, the fact that they actually did identify it a couple of months ago, called it out, the response to this seems to indicate that people are getting their head around it, and they're starting to realize how, for example, how Facebook was used to meddle in election process, or with Google's instance, how Google and their advertising might have been targeted and leveraged as part of an information campaign by people who are trying to meddle in international affairs or the election process of other countries.
Okay. Now, what are your plans for expansion for your company? Are you planning to offer other new products and services, or do you want to enter newer markets?
Yeah, what we want to do is we want to scale, right? So when we started 2010, we were primarily consulting based, although we did a lot of testing. So consulting and testing were the two primary business lines. We added the incident response a couple of years later. We got called in to do a couple of very large breaches in 2012. And then based on all that experience, we built the Managed Detection and Response, or MDR solution. That is our scalable answer to cybersecurity need for business. And we built that specifically to scale. And so we're super focused on making sure that we can deliver the most good to the most amount of people at the lowest cost possible. And so that is our solution is, we can plug in our controls into a corporate or any organization's environment and manage cybersecurity risk within acceptable parameters at a price point that you certainly couldn't do yourself, nor does it exist anywhere else today. I mean, we're doing things at half to a third of the cost of what you do it yourself, and that's, again, because we're scalable. So our focus is strictly on scaling that capability, the Managed Detection and Response service. We'll continue to do consulting. We'll continue to grow to some degree in consulting and testing and incident response. And of course, incident response is going to continue to evolve as the speed to response and resolution gets better for across the board. We think we've got a good handle on, for example, getting the tools necessary to investigate deployed really quickly around the world, getting resolution really quickly, and we'll continue to evolve that. But our biggest focus is on growing the Managed Detection and Response client base, again, because we can replicate that kind of value to multiple clients, and so that's our focus.